ought to be in pictures. You're wonderful to see.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Deep Dive Movie Reviews with my friend Steve Hackman and myself, James Marsh. This episode, we are talking Andrew Dominik's Blonde.
Hey, but before we talk Blonde, you know the drill. If you haven't already subscribed to Deep Dive Movie Reviews, it'd be a great favor to us if you went ahead and just hit that little button. And while you're there, hit the little bell next to it. That way you're notified every single time a new video is uploaded. Hey, and while you're there, go ahead and like this video. And just as a reminder, Deep Dive Movie Reviews does contain spoilers, so you have been warned. James, let's talk Blonde.
Okay, so Blonde is a fictional biography of Marilyn Monroe. So it is, and yet it isn't. It's an adaptation, actually, of a novel by Joyce Carol Oates, which was published in the year 2000 and was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. And Oates considers it's one of her sort of best pieces of writing, in which she fictionalizes the life and the trials and tribulations of Norma Jean Baker, aka Marilyn Monroe. And she deliberately in the novel sort of doesn't use the names of certain key players, specifically I think the famous people that Monroe has relations with, namely Arthur Miller and Joe DiMaggio and JFK. They are referred to as sort of the president and the playwright and the ex-athlete. And I believe in the film as well, they are referred to, or they are not named, whereas a lot of other famous people along the way, like Billy Wilder and Tony Curtis and whomever, are. And so essentially what it does is it starts with her very troubled childhood, her mentally disturbed mother who has not only suicidal but also homicidal tendencies, the absent father she knows only from a photograph pinned to the bedroom wall that we don't even know if it's a real photograph, if it's actually of him or who it is. And then it goes jumps forward as Ana de Armas takes on the character, and we get snapshots, a series of episodes from her life, breaking into the industry, making it big, all the time disturbed by this traumatic childhood, very insecure, very fragile in the face of sort of overwhelming media attention. And then these sort of troubled, tempestuous, tragic relationships that she has with DiMaggio and then Miller and then JFK, which all seem to be part and parcel her in search of her father, essentially. We also see her relationship with the young Charlie Chaplin Jr., Edward G. Robinson Jr., which starts off as a kind of it starts off as a very sort of consensual menage a trois between the three of them, but it takes a kind of dark and dirty turn as it goes on, and with quite sort of traumatic revelations. So there's a lot going on. Steve, where to begin?
James, people go to movies for all kinds of different experiences and things that they want to get out of the movies. You've got what you enjoy in a film. I've got what I enjoy in a film. Let me just say to the viewer, if the experience you're looking for is to watch a tragedy of a woman who is manipulated and assaulted and sexually abused for nearly 3 hours, then this is the experience for you. I mean, this is a tragic childhood. This is tragic career, tragic relationships, tragic marriages, ending in a tragic death. And there is nigh a redemptive quality or a moment of hope or a glimmer of redemption in this movie. Whenever there appears to be just a sliver, anything that brings a smile to Ana de Armas's Marilyn Monroe is quickly quenched by the next tragedy that is yet to unfold in this woman's life. So I found this very difficult to watch. This is not something I enjoyed. I mean, having said that, not unlike Don't Worry, Darling, which we just reviewed previously, this is visually stunning. There are moments of, I feel like I'm watching a Life magazine come to life. There
Absolutely.
is just these black and white imagery. Obviously, the film transverses between black and white and color to accentuate the theme that they're trying to bring to the forefront. And there was moments in black and white where they did a brilliant job of capturing that iconic zeitgeist American moment that Americans associate with Marilyn Monroe. So on certain levels, this film succeeded and did well, but it was very difficult for me to watch.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's a brutal, quite sort of unremitting picture of a sort of tortured soul. It kind of almost leans into sort of real kind of exploitation films. Like there was a film I watched recently called Thriller: A Cruel Picture, which is a Swedish movie from the 60s, and it's just a nasty movie about like a woman who just goes through this sort of gauntlet of hell, and then gets her revenge at the end, and it's supposed to have inspired Kill Bill and all the rest of it. And it was quite unremitting, and it reminds me of that. It reminds me of Irreversible, the French movie, where you're just seeing sort of cruelty inflicted upon a woman,
yes,
for no fault, through no fault of her own. She doesn't invite any of this upon her or do anything to annoy any of these guys or provoke any of these guys. She's painted here as an incredibly sort of vulnerable, sort of vulnerable person, and also a very sort of passive character as well, where just bad things seem to draw, bad people seem to be drawn to her, and bad things seem to just happen to her without her provocation, really, very, very much.
And such a poor soul, because Marilyn Monroe, and again, Ana de Armas just portrays her so wonderfully. It's hard not to fall in love with this woman. And she's so beautiful, but it goes beyond just a good-looking woman. She exudes a sensuality. And that exuded sensuality mixed with an insecurity and a low self-esteem just made her ripe to be manipulated, to be used, to be, and it was just, again, I'm repeating myself, it's hard to watch someone who is so vulnerable be taken advantage of again and again and again and again. And even when she finds someone like Joe DiMaggio who says, I want to be there to protect you. I want to cover you. I want to be your protector. I want to fill the gap. And you're thinking, go, Joe. He ends up,
he's a brute.
He's a brute. He's
he inflicts
just becomes
probably more physical pain on her than anybody else, arguably.
No, if anything, it was probably, at least as far as the film goes, I don't claim to be an encyclopedia on Marilyn Monroe, but from the film, it would appear that Arthur Miller was probably the best fit she had.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it is a brilliant performance, actually. She is incredibly sort of vulnerable and beautiful and exudes all of those kind of qualities that we know Marilyn Monroe to have radiated. And I think that the film doesn't sort of pull any punches in that regard. There have been sort of some headlines about the fact that this is the first NC-17 rated Netflix movie, which is a kind of a bit of a misnomer in a way, because obviously there aren't ratings on Netflix, certainly not in the same way. But for those of you outside of the US, the NC-17 is sort of the strictest rating. It means that nobody under the age of 17 would be admitted into the cinema to watch it, where in a cinema. But it's and what that normally means in terms of content is there's going to be graphic sexual content in there, and you see a rape scene. There's a lot of nudity in the film. There's a scene of oral sex towards the end of the film, which is, the camera is right in there, you know, as a third party almost. And so because of there is so much of that, it's a very vulnerable performance in other ways as well. It's not just a portrayal of a vulnerable person, but it's a vulnerable performance in and of itself. And I think there's already been, again, this is a film that has garnered quite a lot of column inches of coverage already. And I think that there has been some concern over the fact that some of the nude sequences and sex scenes have been sort of leaked prematurely onto the internet. And it's just like, well, that's going to happen. The sad truth is Ana de Armas is an actress in the spotlight, not quite to the stature of Marilyn Monroe, but people are going to want to see that, and that's going to get out. But I think that really kind of detracts from the film. I do want to talk about what you were saying about how it feels like it's been ripped from Life magazine, because yes, I completely agree with you. It's one of the things I really wanted to talk about, and it's obviously incredibly intentional. Andrew Dominik is this Australian filmmaker who's very visually motivated. I think his best movie so far is The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. Right. Brilliant Western with Brad Pitt and Casey Affleck, which used vintage cameras and vintage lenses from the period in order to create this very sort of specific visual quality. Here you got this sort of ever-changing aspect ratio. Quite a lot of the film is in sort of the Academy 4:3, the old style sort of square ratio, and then it's when they're shooting Some Like It Hot, the big sort of studio is when the screen really sort of blows out to the big sort of anamorphic widescreen, and it does flip from color to black and white seemingly at random almost, and use different film stocks. There's a brilliant sequence where Arthur Miller is walking through the streets of New York, and he's clearly used a very different kind of color film stock than some of the other sequences. And I think that the main reason Dominik is doing this is to acknowledge the sort of the fact that we know this woman only through media coverage of her. That we are used to seeing her through this very skewed perspective of splashy covers, movie footage, paparazzi shots, and that's about it. So the film is if it's about anything, it's about finding the real or defining the real Marilyn. And I think it comes up at the end, I think it comes to the conclusion that not even she knew who the real Marilyn Monroe was, if anybody at all. And
in fact, she would often refer to Marilyn almost like another person. Yes, Marilyn is getting more famous now. Yes, Marilyn's doing quite well. Like there was this, she kept a distance, and people that she trusted, whether they ended up being worthy of that trust in the end is debatable. But if she trusted you, you got brought into her inner circle, and you got to call her Norma. And there was Norma and there was Marilyn, and there was a divide between those characters.
Well, there's that scene where she's meeting Arthur Miller, and there's an immediate spark there. Yes. And he's like, "What should I call you? Do I call you Marilyn, or do I call you Norma?" And she's like, "You can call me Norma." And he's like, "Maybe I'll call you Marilyn in front of other people." And she was like, "In front of other people, I don't care what you call me. You can call me anything. You can whistle. You can say, 'Hey, you,'" And there's something she's trying to create a sort of an intimacy and a sort of a casualness between the two of them. But what it comes out as is completely the opposite. She's just kind of demeaning herself completely, sort of dehumanizing herself. But she's like, when I'm out in public, it's like, that's not me anyway. When I'm out, among people, that's not me. So I'm not going to care how I'm treated.
I was going to say, I think that was a defense mechanism, though.
Yeah, too, but that's what I mean.
Yeah, because obviously that was one of her defense mechanisms against being considered to be the blonde, stupid woman who doesn't know anything. And obviously that defense mechanism would fail at times, and you'd see her blow up on set and yell at the director, like, "I'm not stupid. I'm not." But I think that was her way of, I don't care what people call me, because that's not a real person, and that's not who I am. So if they want to call Marilyn stupid, or that she's just a silly blonde, that doesn't affect Norma. Norma is safe and tucked away in here.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a complete detachment from who she is at home and who she is outside. And I think that because it did feel very much like a kind of patchwork of moments, and it felt to me that the moments that the story chose to bring to life are predominantly moments that we recognize from iconic photographs or movie clips from her. A number of the scenes where she's either at home, or she's, there's a scene where she's with Arthur Miller and they're sitting in a window reading so-and-so, or is it DiMaggio? I can't remember which. You're like, "Oh, I've seen this image before. I know this scene."
Yes.
I know this image, and what they've done is they've just kind of fleshed out around it. They've said, "Okay, well, this is the scene in which that iconic image comes from." And it felt to me that a lot of the film, when they were developing the story, a lot of the scenes started from an iconic image, and we're like, "Okay, now this is about that Marilyn, now this is about that Marilyn," and they kind of worked out from that. Albeit that I think the film, and I think this is what's upset a lot of people, and I think this is probably one of the struggles a lot of people are having with the film, is the fact that the film makes it very clear from the outset, this is not a biopic of Marilyn Monroe. This is a fictionalized sort of what if scenario. We've had so many sort of biopics recently that have done this. This isn't new. I mean, Spencer, just like last year, is a fictionalized slice of life, peek behind the curtain, if you like, of Lady Diana's life. It's not real,
Mhm.
you know, but it's exploring a fictional reality of real people. Even Elvis, that we saw earlier this
Yeah.
year, you know,
Well,
plays
I,
hard and loose with the truth.
I was going to ask you a question about that, though, James, because I was in my mind comparing this to Elvis while I was watching it. And I would argue that the Elvis film, Baz Luhrmann was attempting to root it in some reality. And we had mentioned in our review of it that it was just, it's such a broad spectrum of his life that it's hard to capture everything. The question I want to ask you is this, is both Marilyn Monroe and Elvis Presley are these larger than life American zeitgeists. We said in our Elvis review, there's almost no one on the planet who doesn't know Elvis Presley. You could almost say the same thing about Marilyn Monroe. Those images are absolutely iconic. And both performances, whether it was Austin Butler performing as Elvis or Ana de Armas as Marilyn Monroe, it's just spot on, in my opinion, performances of their respective iconic characters. But I found the Elvis film so much more enthralling and interesting to watch than I found Blonde to be. And one of the reasons that went off in my head, and I wanted to ask you about it, is this. In many ways, I find Elvis was truly a talented person. Like, he was extremely interesting, extremely skilled, extremely talented. He was just a ball of energy and talent. Whereas Marilyn certainly was not a bad actress, but she's not known as a great actress. She was one of the first people known for being famous for being famous. She was famous because she was endowed by God with some unique sensuality that she was not able to turn off. And what I found was the people in her life are more interesting than she is. Joe DiMaggio is more interesting. Arthur Miller is more interesting. JFK is more interesting. Marilyn is not the interesting one in this. She's tragic. She's been treated horribly. This is at polar opposites to Elvis, who is a remarkably interesting character, incredibly talented, incredibly skilled. And the people in his orbit were less interesting than he was. That was just a perspective I had. I wanted to ask your thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating, and I would like to agree with that point.
Yeah.
You know, because obviously these two characters sort of came up around the same time as well. And yeah, no, I think that's a really sort of sharp observation that in the case of Elvis, he was the dynamo. You know, he was the talent. Whereas, you know, for the most part, Marilyn Monroe feels that like a sort of rag doll being tossed around in the breeze by literally everybody and anybody who can exploit her. You know, she is a remarkable beauty and had charisma, you know, and style oozing out of every pore. But she was on her own. She didn't have anybody around her, anybody to protect her. She was at the mercy of the industry, both the film industry and the press as well. And I think she, you know, they sort of between them sort of just destroyed her, really. I think in terms of which is the better film and why, I think Elvis is the better film. But I think the reason why people resonate with his story more is the music. You know, I think he has so much music that, yes, he's an icon in his own right, and he's charismatic and he's good looking and all the rest of it. But there's also all this music. Yeah, he did movies, but let's be honest, his movies aren't great. He did all this music, which everybody, I think, is going to have heard at least one of them and be like, oh yeah, I like that song, I know that song. And so you immediately kind of warm to it. And I think that film did a really good job of utilizing all the music and live performances and the rest of it to the benefit of the film. I think in the case of Blonde, she has obviously a much smaller catalog of art to present herself with, other than, you know, just her own image and the photographs and all the rest of it. You know, her body of film work is not huge, and neither is it especially good.
No,
you know, you've got Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and you've got Some Like It Hot, and you've got The 7-Year Itch. You know, those are kind of the three sort of tentpole releases, if you like. And yes, she did other movies. She did The Misfits, she did Bus Stop, she did Niagara. But they're not classics by
No.
any means. You know, even her classics, really, you've got Some Like It Hot is probably the great movie that she did.
Right.
And the others are kind of like, yeah, they're fine. They're fine.
And again, she's more known by who she hung with. I mean, Joe DiMaggio was one of the greatest baseball players there ever was. Arthur Miller, one of the great American playwrights. JFK, one of the most iconic United States presidents ever. So her light is always going to be a little dimmer when compared to this body of greatness and talent that surrounds her. Again, a lot of eyes are on her because she's so darn good looking. But at the end of the day, I felt that the film, and especially at 2 hours and 45 minutes, it's just not, there's just not enough story here to justify what we saw.
Well, I think the sad truth is, much like her, there isn't enough substance to her as a person. It sounds like a terrible thing to say, but
it is.
I think it is. Sorry,
it is. But it's true.
Yeah, she was not a compelling human being, I don't think. And again, I want to keep stressing the fact that that the film is not attempting to be an accurate historical document on her life. It takes a number of liberties. It cuts corners. It omits information, and it fabricates stuff because this is a fiction. This is not a historical document, and I think a lot of people are struggling to get past that. And I think a lot of the critics of the film have been like, that's not what happened, that's not what she was like, that's not how it went. And it's like, the film isn't claiming to be that. And I think people struggle with this when history is not adhered to on screen, but it's a different medium attempting to do something else.
I agree with that. I mean, I certainly wouldn't argue that point, but I would also add to that two other elements that made this difficult among some of the other things we mentioned. Is there's a level of pretentiousness I found in it as well, because you try to substitute some of that historical accuracy for some surreal montages and visuals that sometimes worked and were quite stunning, and other times just came across as again, cutting corners for good storytelling, which is what I found at times. Also, when you take 45 seconds to a minute to open a box, there is just too many scenes that go on too long with too much really uninteresting things going on. And this movie is bloated time-wise with Marilyn gets a gift. Marilyn stares at it for 10 seconds. Marilyn goes over and gently plays with the bow. Marilyn weeps for a minute, maybe has a flashback. It's like, for God's sake, there's a pacing issue here that I struggled with. And so I don't think it's just the historical inaccuracies that some of the critics are finding difficult in this movie. I think there's a number of elements that we're not working with all the pistons firing on.
And I think, I mean, I want to say, I think it's purposefully like that. I think Andrew Dominik, without a doubt, made the film he wanted to make. He wanted to make a film which lingers on the face of Ana de Armas as Marilyn Monroe as much as possible, that places her in these gorgeous situations, and that essentially milks her tragic life story for all its beauty and for all the the stunning iconography that you can get from it. It doesn't really shed any light on her story, on her truth, if you like, and on her background, and how did this, it kind of tells you how this happened. But like her relationships, you don't really learn much about her relationships with any of these people any more than you may have known already. I mean, what you get from the film is that Joe DiMaggio beat her until she could get no more. Arthur Miller was got ill, and they were on kind of different age levels and all the rest of it, and JFK just seems like an ass. And it's strange because I obviously wanted to know a lot more about that relationship, but this is not the film that's going to tell me that. Instead, it wants to paint this kind of weird, damaged picture of a girl who calls everybody she loves daddy, which is incredibly, odd. Just because, and I've put myself in that situation. I would feel incredibly uncomfortable if my partner started calling me daddy.
Yeah,
I'm just like, no, that's not a turn on. That's
not gonna work.
Freaky, weird, especially when you know why.
Yes.
Why she's doing it. And it's because she really, the only person she's ever loved is this man who arguably doesn't exist.
Yeah, you hear the term daddy issues, but in this one, it really does apply. There's something going on there. It also makes me wonder too, I've, as an English major and a big voracious reader over the years, I have read Joyce Carol Oates over the years. I have not read Blonde, but it makes me wonder about the source material, because if I'm honest, yes, she's won all kinds of awards and Pulitzers and for me to critique her but at the end of the day, not many people have ever come up to me. You got to read the new Joyce Carol Oates novel. I've read, like I said, I've read some. They're not page turners, and some of the elements of this film that left me a little underwhelmed. I'm wondering how much of it is attributed to that source material, because I felt the same way whenever I read a Joyce Carol Oates novel as well.
Well, my impression, I haven't read the book either, but my impression of it is that it probably worked a little bit better in the book, and that the book doesn't acknowledge precisely who it's talking about. I think in the book, it's blatantly obvious that it's Marilyn Monroe that this is about. But my understanding is that in the book it's not identified as such, and so I think you can have a little bit more fun on the page with kind of poking at the truth and while bending it a little bit more. You know what I mean? Whereas in a film, you can't escape the fact that this is who you're talking about, because it has to look the part. And obviously so the results are more vulnerable, if you like. You're gonna anger people a lot more.
Well, James, I think we've had a very good discussion about Blonde, and now we're left to that time. We have to have an instrument that we measure it by. What are we going to measure Blonde by today? How many daddy issues?
Oh, how many daddies? How many Life magazine covers? I don't know.
Life magazine covers. Let's keep this iconic.
Let's keep it nice.
Within the
speaking
zeitgeist.
of which, there was just one piece of interesting trivia that I thought I would acknowledge, which was the fact that the actor playing JFK was Casper Philipson, who's I think I want to say Danish actor, but he also played JFK in Jackie.
Oh, interesting.
The movie with Natalie Portman from a few years ago. So, well done him.
James, why don't you start us off? How many Life magazines are we talking about?
Okay, so this is an interesting film to talk about, because there is lots to talk about, because it does play fast and loose with a truth that we all feel that we kind of know. But I think that the more that we talk about it, the more we realize how little we do know about Marilyn Monroe and how enigmatic she was as a personality. And I think that that's what the film was trying to get at. The problem is that as good as the film looks, and as authentic as Ana de Armas's portrayal feels, it only sort of seems to highlight the fact of how little substance there is there. And with the added length on top of that, is you end up with this film that, it, like you say, is all vacuous pretension and all sort of just empty imagery with not a lot going on, dare I say, upstairs or even behind it. So the ultimate thing is that while you can respect the intent, you have to admit that it's a failure, and you have to admit that it doesn't succeed in either being a rewarding biopic of Marilyn Monroe. I'm not sure how faithful it is as an adaptation to the book, but it isn't a gratifying sort of watch either. Experience to watch it. So as much as I like Ana de Armas, and I do think she's great in it, I'm going to give it 2 Life magazine covers out of 5.
James, I almost want to echo you. I want to give it 2, but then I remembered I just gave 1.5 to Don't Worry, Darling. And I think I like Don't Worry, Darling more than I liked this film. I enjoyed the experience of it more. There's some technical aspects in Blonde that I can certainly appreciate, and I think we've discussed it. The one other point that I want to mention, I forgot, is the two characters, Charlie Chaplin's son and Edward G. Robinson's son. And I found them fascinating and tragic, and I found myself looking them up on Wikipedia just because I want to know what happens, not to Charlie Chaplin and Edward G. Robinson, two actors who I admire, but realizing I know nothing about their sons.
Right.
They had made movies, but you realize how they just fell into alcoholism and all kinds of debauchery because they could never measure up to their hero dads. And when you read about it in Wikipedia, it is horribly tragic. And it is watching those two characters and what they did in Marilyn Monroe's life, it's very hard to watch a train wreck of humanity. I like to celebrate life. I like people to flourish. And when you see the exact opposite of flourishing happening, it's just, again, it's hard to watch. And that's one of the reasons this movie was difficult. It was not a good experience that left me feeling, I mean, not that every film I watch has to have a happy ending with a good feeling, but this was just a very difficult experience. And for that reason, I'm going to give it 1.5. 1.5 Life magazines.
Fair enough, and very eloquently put.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I think just to echo something that we said a little bit earlier, I think what the film did more than anything else was make me more interested in a number of the other characters around her. I'd love to have seen a whole movie with Arthur Miller with Adrien Brody as Arthur Miller.
Yes.
Or these two sort of wayward sons of golden era Hollywood greats. But I guess that'll have to wait.
That will have to wait. Well, that's what we think about Blonde, but hey, what do you think about it? We've got a caption box below here at YouTube. Just go ahead and give us your feedback. Let us know what you thought. Were we right? Were we wrong? Did we hit? Did we miss? We'd love to hear your perspective. Also, James and I are on social media. You can follow us on Twitter as well as Instagram. And those links you can find in the description box below. James?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, what do you think of Marilyn Monroe, this portrayal of her? How do you feel about the fact that we're getting these kind of biopics which are just bending history and bending the story and making things up, in order to satisfy their own particular needs in terms of filmmaking? What are your views on Marilyn Monroe? What are your favorite Marilyn Monroe films? And let us know in the comments below. We would love to hear from you. And while you're there, go check out all our other videos. We've got like 75 odd videos up here right at the moment. Go and have a look at some of the other things that we've been talking about. We're doing every best picture all the way from Wings to the present day, and we're about a decade or so into that, as well as other reviews, new and old, Asian and Hollywood movies. Take your pick, have a little root around, let us know.
Absolutely. Until next episode.
Bye.
We'll see you at the movies.
You ought to be
Go change it. Don't touch that
You're
tire.
wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be.